Just typing in my messages here. Welcome, everyone. Just typing in my messages. On Facebook, it seems to be pretty clear. So if on Discord it gets to be, the voice gets to be too cracky, you can listen in on Facebook, Swift Live by ODZ. And steady pace. I'm telling everyone here on course to head over if they want to Facebook to listen to Zwift Live by ODZ. Thanks everyone for joining. So today we have our guest speaker for the day, Coach Tom Danielson from Cinch Cycling. Good morning, Tom.
How's it going, Taya? How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm awesome.
So I'm keeping my pace here. Let me back it down to 1.5 to 2 watts per kilogram. And so we had Tom joining us a couple weeks ago, and we had brought a conversation about cycling in general. And I thought it would be a good idea to bring him back today to go in a little bit deeper in the topic of training. And given the time of the year, at least for us here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're approaching winter. It would be a good opportunity to talk about things that riders can do to take their winter training to the next level. And so Tom has a, within Cinch Cycling, he has a system called FORM, which focuses on the 4 pillars of his coaching program, which are focus, fitness, execution, and nutrition. So Tom, perhaps we can go through those and talk about how those would fit in or translate into things that riders can do and can keep in mind as they prepare their winter training.
Yeah.
So perhaps go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah. I mean, I think the longer I've been a coach and the longer I've been in the sport, I realized that there's a flow of how things work between the mind and the body, the skills, the education, the strategy, and then of course the nutrition. And there's so much focus on the fitness side of cycling because that's kind of the obvious part of it. But if you don't flow it with the other components, it just doesn't work very well. And you see, me as a coach, you see, hold on. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
What is that? Okay.
I
awesome.
muted. There was some background noise. Mm-hmm.
So as a coach, you start to look at people and you're like, well, how can I help them? How can I get them to where they want to go and where they can go? And a lot of times they don't really know where they can go. So I just developed this new system form to look at all of those 4 components and figure out how I can help people in and grow in their lives and grow in the sport of cycling outside of simply just one-dimensional component instead of one just thing, fitness training. So yeah, I mean, it's been an awesome journey so far, and I'm really enjoying like working with you guys and sort of pushing the envelope in all these different areas and seeing people develop in so many different dimensions besides getting stronger.
Sure. You've been very busy with that. I know that. And I'm really looking forward to working with you on this as you're my coach. And so I'm really excited about that. So I wanted to, then could we start by then thinking about how someone should set their objectives for the next season or 2018 at this point?
Yeah, so the first pillar is focus, and that essentially is your mindset or someone's mindset. And this becomes really important because it's ultimately your why, or it starts with your why. Why are you riding your bike? Why are you training? Why are you on Zwift at I mean it's 5 a.m. here, but you guys are at 6 a.m. there or whatever. Why are you doing this? And it sounds like a simple question, but a lot of people just really don't even know the answer, or they haven't asked themselves that question and they're not aware of the answer. And when you're motivated and when things are going well, you don't really need the answer a lot of the time. But when things get tough or you get to that crossroads, you need that answer. You need to know why you're doing it to push through the hardships and get to and push through the pain. And, as you know, as an athlete, a lot of times it's not always about growth every single day in one area. There's so many different areas and you need to look at those different areas to feel progression, feel fulfillment. So, that question, what are my objectives? You start by asking yourself why. Why are you in the sport of cycling? What are you looking to get from it? And that answer is a deep answer. And as a professional athlete, the obvious why a lot of times was like, oh, well, you make a living, or I'm trying to win the certain race. But for me personally, that really wasn't even my why. Like, when I look back at my career and I ask myself these questions, I loved riding my bike because I loved that daily process. I loved getting up and going through the routine, putting my shoes on, getting my breakfast ready, having my coffee, having a plan and objectives, and then working through that plan throughout the day, and then finishing it and looking back and seeing, what I accomplished and how I felt. So had I known that better, I think now looking back at my career, I would have made better choices and felt more fulfilled most of the time if I realized that was why I was in the sport of cycling, not to win races or not about yellow jerseys. But if I knew that, I think that my objectives would have been a lot simpler, a lot clearer, and I would have been more content most of the time. So I think that said, looking into 2018, I think people need to, when they're setting their objectives, ask themselves that question: why am I riding my bike, and what in 2018 can I do to push myself and fulfill myself even more in that why, in that category, rather than the obvious things that people will say, what are their objectives for 2018? Well, I want to get this much power, or I want to get these race results. In my opinion, those things are just outcomes that will happen if you make good objectives that are in line with who you are and why you're doing it. And if you stay true to those whys, those results that everyone wants will just happen anyway.
So, and we'll talk a little bit more about specific training itself, but what we're talking about here really is a mental state. We're talking about your why. You're talking about how you see your training, how you see yourself in the sport of cycling. So it seems to me, and you mentioned that routine of getting ready, having your breakfast in the morning, etc. It seems to me that when you start training, you have to have a change in mental state, right? So for example, you wake up early or at lunchtime, if you work out at that time, after working, between activities. What are some of the things that could help someone with this transition? In having the busy lives that everybody does into having a consistency in their training.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a great point. How do you transition between mental states? And for you guys with jobs and families and lifestyles, like that's a big component. And as a coach, like I hear that a lot when people, it's either getting up in the morning or it's after work, they're doing their training. They are a lot of times they're fumbling through the first 20 minutes of their workout because they're not fully checked in. They're not all into the workout in the beginning, because they're still dealing with what they just had going on in their life. They can't let it go. They can't switch that mindset. I think that's something as a professional athlete I learned to do really well, and most professional athletes are very successful with, is changing mind states like on the go, just straight away switching from one to the other. And that is something that I've created within Cinch that we'll start using, is this essential like priming mindset, where you go through the steps of, how do you switch and check in from, your current mind state, whether it is, at work or waking up in the morning, and that having like a fresh slate right in front of you and ready to take on a new challenge. That's super, super important in switching. And I'd say that, I don't want to give too much of it away, but I'd say that the best way to do that is identify your purpose, identify your target straight away. So that, I think that is the best way to switch, is before you take on your new challenge, sit down and identify, or take a minute and identify specifically what you want to accomplish from your workout or from your race. So, there you are, you're ready to go. You've got your shoes on, you've got your helmet on, or if you're on Zwift, you're on your trainer, you're ready to go. Don't just start. Like, take a second and say, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What am I specifically going to get? And just, look at that, analyze that, understand that. And if you do that before you start, things just become so clear, right? You just have this massive concentration where, you can just see what's in front of you. Most people don't ask themselves that hard question before they start their training. They don't ask what their purposes of the workout. And a lot of times, if you don't ask that and you don't understand it, what happens when it gets tough right away? You want to quit. You want to bail out. You hear all these excuses, and usually those excuses are what comes from the previous mindset, the previous state that you were just in. So, right, they're like, oh, well, this is hurting. I'm not all in mentally here. Well, my excuses are, wow, I had a tough day at work, or it's early in the morning, or I'm tired, or all those things that they were previously dealing with comes right back in. So as a pro athlete, you have to be able to switch that on the the flip of the switch. So that is important for you guys as well. Probably even more important because you guys are transitioning quickly. I heard some people on Discord before we started today. They're like, well, I'm on lunch break. They're in the UK and they're on lunch break. Mm-hmm. Well, that's hard, right? Like you're in your job, you're cranking in your work, and then bam, switch right to your lunch break with intervals. And maybe some days you're going to be motivated to work out in your lunch break, and other days you're just going to be exhausted and carrying so much baggage from prior. So it's important to learn how to transition to those different mind states and doing it efficiently. And I believe that starts with identifying your target and understanding your purpose.
The mental state, so important. And the other thing is too, sometimes when people are, when they are, let's say at work and they have to transition into doing the workout, there's sometimes too a little bit of difficulty in even getting to your trainer or getting and actually, so physically, not just mentally, but you're sitting there and you have to physically stand up and go do it. I think the more thinking you do before, a little bit, the worse it is. So perhaps just do it. And let's say you carved out a time for your day that you're going to work out. And you have that planned ahead of time. It's either the morning or midday, whichever days of the week. And then you just go do it, get dressed. And from that point on, I guess then start to shift your mindset. Does that make sense, Tom?
Oh, absolutely. And what for me as a pro, what would shift my mindset for me was just the act of going through, putting on my jersey, putting on my chamois, putting on my shoes and my helmet. And I developed that over 15 years of competing. So that's what I'm working to do with you guys is train you guys to be able to do it without having to go through 15 years of racing a Tour de France or whatever to figure that out. But like for me, that's really what it was. And it still is I put my shoes on, I put my chamois on, and it's just like, I just switch. It doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. I just become, a different person.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, still, it just happens. But it's important
Yeah.
that also can happen with you guys. And you just, it's funny is before I do that, I'll be in that other mind state where it's like, I don't want to do it. Right. I'm like, I'm tired. I'm got too much going on. I have all the excuses there are too, right? I hear them all constantly. Oh, my kids need this or that. Um, oh, like I can't let a lot of that stuff go until I put the clothes on. And then it's just 100% clarity. I'm like, okay, I can get that stuff done for my kids in 1.5 hours instead of right now. It's going to be okay.
Right.
Or, things like that. So it's important to have that, that trigger ultimately that helps you find that clear mind state, which again, I believe starts with, the target and the purpose.
Sure. Yeah. Carve out that time, start doing it, get into the mindset. And then before you start your workout, take a minute to, think about the purpose of that workout, because yeah, you'll need it also through the workout. Makes perfect sense. So should we move on to the next pillar, the fitness one, and talk about the types of training that people should be doing then this time of the year?
Yeah, so I think that's a big question, and as a pro, that was always a question I had. Like, what do you do in the wintertime? And the traditional thing that everyone thinks that you should do, or at least at my level, a lot of the talk is like base miles and a lot of easy miles, and then a lot of time in the gym. And honestly, like it is probably the most fun thing to do during this time of the year as well. You just want to get out there and ride slow and easy and have a lot of social rides. And then of course, like the gym, it's just a lot warmer than outside. So, any excuse that you can have to be warm, I think is a good one. But as I progress and as the sport has evolved, you start to learn that this old way of thinking doesn't really work. And when I look back at my career, I would basically do this periodization that I would basically build a house and then just tear the whole thing down and then rebuild it, the same house, over the course of a year, which is pretty insane when you think about it. But that's when you're in the moment, you don't really think like, well, am I actually getting better year to year? You're just obsessed with that sort of process, like we were talking about, where it's like, well, I feel like I'm getting better, so I'm working hard, and we see that same mentality going on in business and work as well. Is like, well, people like to talk about how much they work. Well, I work 40 hours a week, or I work 60 hours a week, or I'm working so many hours a week. Very few people are asking questions like, well, how much are you getting done in that? Like, are you getting,
Mm-hmm.
are you doing great stuff in that 60 hours, or are you just, burning circles in that 60 hours? And it's the same in sport and in training. Is a lot of us are just doing ridiculous amounts of training because we're obsessed with talking about how much we're working. We love that, to feel like we're working a lot. So as a coach and the last years of my career, I started to look at this and like, am I being really efficient with my time, and am I getting better? And it turns out that no. The answer is no. There is a way to do your training where you're constantly progressing and changing your focus all the time, but you're changing your focus in creating building blocks. So year after year, you can be getting better, but use periodization as a way to build ultimately a bigger house, rather than building one house and then tearing the whole thing down and then rebuilding it, and a lot of times not even as high as you built it, is what as good of a house as you built before. So you go back to your question, what should people be doing this time of year? Well, I think right now is a good time to be building sort of the foundation of that house. And while originally we thought that foundation is just super low, it's a low intensity, turns out that the best use of your time is to kind of build that foundation a little bit higher. So looking at these, what I call medium zones, that are, if you speaking like lactate terms, about 2 millimoles to 3 millimoles of lactate, So it's a little bit higher up off the ground than the traditional foundation, which is just easy and fat burning, but a little bit higher, and essentially the highest amount of power that you can produce using fat as a fuel, and a little bit of sugar. So I think that's a great zone, or a bunch of zones that you guys, or that people can train right now. And if you do find these zones, oh, sorry.
I was going to ask, perhaps you're going to talk about it, but translating that, because it's hard for, I guess, a lot of us to grasp the concept of where that zone might lie. And you alluded to the fact that it's a little bit above the fat burning zone, but it's not so intense. So are we talking a little bit then, is it, what's the sandwich? Is it a little bit above the fat burning zone and then below threshold?
It is still fat burning, so it's basically the highest amount of power that you can produce using fat. So if you were to visualize it on that, whatever scale, it would be the highest end of tempo. So what you could essentially hold for 2 hours, something like that. Obviously it changes, but in my program, we have 3 zones within this medium zone. So there's a way to look, and if you look at what's happening in the body, it's just simply going close to 3 millimoles of lactate, and then going close to 2 millimoles of lactate. So everything sort of in between it, and like 1.5 millimoles of lactate. So really looking at that zone in there, and there's a big difference that a lot of people don't know about in those 3 areas. So if it's 3 millimoles of lactate, your body's using some sugar, mostly fat. And if it's closer to 1, it's all fat. But if you train properly, you can do a lot more power at closer to that 3 millimoles than you can at that 1 millimole. So you can learn how to transition, and what we've been doing between the 3. So you can essentially build speed and maintain speed. So constantly going between those 3 zones while you're riding. So ultimately, the average might be similar to that 1 millimole zone, but you're constantly using that 2 and 3 to build speed. So I know it sounds complicated, but it's really not that complicated. But those medium, or those high power fat burning zones are what we should be working on right now, and then working on strength with them. So building strength in your pedal stroke, in your standing, in your what we call transitioning. So transitioning position. So between sitting and standing, between moving forward and back on your seat. These are all ways that you guys can generate more power more output or more speed with the exact same power. So changing your cadence in these zones as well. And then the last part of it is we talk about, and holding that power zone steady. So we call it a floor. So your ability to hold and be specific with your target powers. Transition between 2 or 3 zones on demand, rather than smearing them all together in one effort.
Got it. So none of that crazy VO2 super intense stuff.
I think that you should do a little bit of that stuff, but just in short amounts. So where you're not putting pressure on the overall system, you're just using it. So you're not putting pressure to train it, to build it, but you're using it in small amounts to keep that strength. That was one of the mistakes that I made earlier in my career, is I would tear down my house by just doing tons and tons of endurance miles, and didn't keep those muscles strong. So what happens when you don't use a muscle or a system? Well, it goes away. So I would lose a lot of the strength and the overall engine that I had because I just didn't use it. My body just got rid of it. So I think right now you guys should do small amounts, but not smashing your head against the wall, doing these 4 or 5 minute crazy hard efforts.
Okay. And that answers the question that Richard Lovelock had here on Facebook. Rich, let me know if that doesn't answer your question. So in other words, it's counterproductive to tear that house down. It also is counterproductive, super high intensity all the time. So there's definitely ways to do it. And like Tom is saying,
Yeah, it goes
measured
back to
amounts.
what I was saying earlier, that you want to train in what I call world tour periodization. That's a term that you'll start to see within our group. But when you're a world tour athlete, you're thinking, 12 months out of the year, how I can get better. And in those 12 months of the year, you're working different zones that are in line with what's happening in your life. So they all those zones, all those things, all the building blocks that you can create and use, they happen in a certain order. So a world tour athlete is going to prioritize that order based on their schedule. A world tour athlete is not going to use periodization as an excuse of just exercising. They're always wanting to get better. You're always thinking about how I can get better. So that's a concept that I'm bringing to you guys is saying, okay, like, how can we get better 12 months out of the year? But we're going to change our focus in what we're getting better at. So we're not burning the candle out. We're not exhausting ourselves mentally, but we're always getting better. So like right now in winter training, there's different things that we can be getting better that will help us in the summertime. That doesn't mean, we're giving up in the wintertime on everything and tearing our house down. Therefore, we can go through the whole process of rebuilding it all summer to then just tear it down again in the fall and the winter. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a question here from John Lyons on your thoughts on training off the bike, weights, yoga, etc.
Yeah. So this goes in the fitness pillar as well. So strength and injury prevention. And my belief system is that if you can't be consistent with it, it's not really worth doing. So as a pro athlete, I always had tons of time to train, tons and tons of time. And a lot of times we were always up against people being skeptical of being a pro athlete. They're like, oh, it must be nice to ride your bike for a living. So we were always driven to kind of prove that, well, we work as much as like a normal working person, right? We're on our bike 6 hours a day, and then we're in the gym 4 hours a day. So actually I'm working like 80 hours a week, but you couldn't be consistent because as soon as the race season started, the gym just disappeared. All these things that we were doing off the bike just completely vanished. And that progress that maybe you would have made in that area just disappeared. So my belief is that it needs to be consistent. And if it's going to be consistent, it needs to be something you can do all the time, any place. And what that boils down to is you really need a floor to do it. You need yourself and a floor because, if you're a parent, you need to be able to do this stuff in the morning before you take your kids to school. If you're in business and you're traveling, you need to be able to do this in your hotel room as well as your house. So relying on barbells and gym stuff is just it's not reality. So my philosophy is it's got to be done on a floor, and usually what that's going to look like is core training, and it's going to look like plyometrics, because these are things that will help you build real strength for cycling, help you with injury prevention and bone density, and then also are great activation, right? So strength training and training off the bike can be great activation for training on the bike. And when I say activation, I mean that neuromuscular connection between your brain and your muscles. That is one of the big obstacles that we're up against, right? When we get tired and fatigued, a lot of times our brains like to disconnect from our body to protect it. And then when we're working or we're sleeping, our hamstrings and glutes and things like that are not firing. So you can use that training off the bike as great activation. So Taya, you've been using this for a while, but we'll do that core training that we'll do right before you get on the bike. That is amazing activation. It takes 10 minutes. It's really simple, but ultimately it helps you not get injured. It helps you with overuse injuries. Knock on one, but none of our athletes have gotten an overuse injury in the 2 years that I've been doing this. So that's pretty great statistics on that end. And then like you traveled down south, and we did a lot of plyometrics. Those cross over very well, and you can see that you didn't lose much of your bike fitness even though you were off your bike for almost 2 weeks. So those exercises are easy to do, and they will help you in the long run, and they're consistent. You can do those any time of the year, any place. You're not relying on a gym membership to get it done.
So I have to add my comment here. I believe that, since I started doing the very short but very effective core routine, that you gave me every time, every day. I do it every single day. It became something that it's just like brushing my teeth now. I do it every day. I think that is genius just because it's quick. I can do it anywhere. And I have low back issues. I have knee problems. I have no pain right now. None. I get no back pain. It's gone from all that core work. Like you said, I traveled. Yes, I traveled. I was on an 11-hour flight, and I was sitting in coach, and I didn't even have back pain, which was the first for me. So it is
That's
extremely
awesome.
effective.
Yeah, and it's just super simple. So that's the kind of the term of cinch. It's slang for simple, and a lot of these techniques and these things that I've created have come from the world's greatest trainers that working with the best people. But then you just simplify it so you can fit it in your life and you can just get it done. And it's like the 10 minutes of exercises that you look at them and you're like, they're so harmless, they're so simple. Like, how can this be great? But then if you look at the biomechanics that go behind it and how it matches up with all the things that we're up against in cycling, all those exercises came from me, getting my ass kicked, with injuries and things like that. And once we created that and started using it, like, I didn't get injured ever. And I wish I had done that my whole life because, as athletes, we're always trying to make things complicated. It's like, well, how can 10 minutes of core before you work out really work? I need to be doing like these extravagant, amazing, whatever TRX workouts and this insane stuff with bands and balls and all that. It's like, yeah, that's great for 2 weeks. And then you say, screw it, I can't do this anymore. And it doesn't work.
Right. Yes, and the consistency that you mentioned before. So, yeah, and I think that also answers Andrew Jane's question on how much core you do and whether to do it year round. I think that let us know in the comments if that didn't answer.
So, I mean, we can just clarify that again, just every day, 10 minutes a day, and before, and this is the key takeaway, guys, before your training, because what that cool routine does is it, again, activates those muscle groups. So when you get on your bike, because those muscle groups are activated, you use them. So you're still doing your core routine. You're still getting stronger on your bike because your hamstrings, your glutes, your lower back, your obliques, everything is checked in. Like we talked about the mental priming. This is physical priming. So the body is completely checked in. It's working awesome. And it's getting stronger, even though you're on your bike doing stuff like that. But consistency and every single day of the year, that's where it's at.
Awesome. And Scott Shaw came in here on Facebook to agree with what we just talked about, and my experience has been his experience as well. So
yeah,
awesome.
Scott's incredible.
How about we transition into FTP, because it's such a big 3-letter acronym that everybody seems to be obsessed about. Why is there so much focus on it? And FTP, functional threshold power, right?
Yeah, I'll avoid my rant for you guys. I'll save you guys my rant this morning. It's early for an FTP rant, but when I first transitioned from pro athlete to coach, like, I didn't even know what FTP was, and no one even talks about this in the world
say
tour,
that again, Tom. When you got to say that again. When you transitioned from
when I transitioned from pro to coach, I just noticed that all these people were asking me about FTP, and a lot of we go back to the why. A lot of the whys that people would sign up is say, well, I need to raise my FTP. And I was like, excuse me, like, what do you want to raise? And, turns out this is called functional threshold power. And one of my first articles that I ever wrote, and I started writing articles to kind of get my philosophies and my thoughts out to people as marketing, was, functional threshold power is not functional. Like, this is not an actual thing. And part of that rant was, you can't do that number anyway. And a lot, they come up with this functional threshold power is you basically do this test 20 minutes all out, and then you take 95% of that. And guess what? That number is what you can hold for an hour. Well, you can't hold that for an hour, actually. And all you guys listening, you should try it. Like, see if you can hold that number, that you do your 20 minutes all out, take 95% of it, and then go hold that number for an hour. It's not possible. But even if it was possible, like that number doesn't do anything. You're not going to drop anyone with that number. You're not going to ride away from anyone in that number. You're not going to be able to chase anyone down in that number. You're not going to be able to time trial at that number. There's no absolute, so it's again functional, but there's no functional use for it. So I couldn't understand why people were so obsessed with it. And then in the pro world, we do threshold testing, which is essentially what I think this is supposed to be. You would do threshold testing, but threshold testing was not the end all be all of your training program. In fact, your training program was built around stuff that you would do in the races. So you were building and training zones and specific things that you would be trying to do or trying to accomplish within your cycling. So go back to your why, again, that focus part of our program. Why are you training and cycling? And if you are trying to get stronger in group rides, or you're trying to get stronger in Zwift races, or you're trying to get stronger in whatever, like FTP is not the answer to any of them. In fact, FTP is essentially a measurement of fitness. So what drives me crazy is that people are building or basing their entire cycling existence around a fitness measurement. And guys, this is like a spin class level perception of fitness. And no offense to spin classes, but I mean, if we've got power meters and we've got, training routines and Zwift races and courses and all this stuff, like I think we need to be thinking a little bit higher level than spin class intervals. We need to be thinking about how can we go fast on our bikes, and how can we be efficient on our bikes, and how can we get stronger on our bikes. And your ability to hold, 20 minutes is a great way to test fitness, but you really have to have the complete package to grow in cycling. So I understand why people have created FTP, and I understand the concept behind it. And I think it's great that people are testing and they're looking for a measurement to grow from their testing. But I don't think people should obsess over it and keep trying to raise this number, because the reality is you're not going to be able to raise it very much. Maybe when you start cycling, it's going to go up a lot, but it is not going to define your cycling performance. And a little bit of background on that is, the last 5 or 8 years of my career, my threshold power was essentially the same number, but my performance went way up. So when I trained specific zones and I trained things really well, I would win races. I would perform awesome in races. And when I wouldn't train those zones, I would get dropped in races. I perform poorly in races, but my threshold power test was exactly the same. So this is not the thing to be focused on. This is a great measurement of of your fitness, but only a measurement of your fitness if you are constantly, training these other zones and growing as an individual, looking at the overall picture, not just this one zone.
So I have that's encouraging actually in my mind, because it's really hard to be focusing on that number. And I spent a lot of years worried about my FTP. And it makes sense too, right? Because it's all about performance. Are you getting better out there? So a better measurement of fitness is how you perform. So let's say that you do a certain race every year. How are you progressing year to year? Or you do Zwift races. How is that turning out, with your training, right? So essentially that's what you're saying.
Yeah. And if you look at it like realistically, a lot of people come in with great threshold powers. A lot of people have a lot of power, and power is not the problem. A lot of people think power is the problem. I'm getting dropped because of power. I don't have enough power. I need more power. I mean, you hear this all the time. And as a coach, like I'm looking at people's numbers. I'm like, guys, you could race World Tour right now. Like you guys have amazing power. And people are like, well, I can't even stay in the C group ride in town. Well, a lot of it is where you're using your power, and you don't have these other zones that are below the threshold, and you don't have the zones above the threshold. And even more importantly, guys, and listen up, is your ability to transition between these zones. So crossing that threshold barrier over and over and over again, which comes down to clearing lactate, flooding and clearing lactate. Now there's something we can talk about, and there is something you can train and get a lot better in, is your ability to flood your body with lactate and then clear it, but clear it still producing a lot of lactate. That's high level stuff. That's the stuff that you guys should be focused on training, not trying to raise this invisible line that ultimately you won't be able to raise very far. And you don't need to. You don't need to beat your head against the wall doing 3 times 20 minutes and all these ridiculous, insane intervals. Build the house higher, but the house has got all kinds of floors. Make it awesome. Make it incredible. Get it way up there. Stop worrying about just one floor, because that one floor is not going to take, that building to the next level.
And I have a question here from Greg on Facebook. He's asking, when you say zones, are you talking about 1, 2, and 3 minute power, etc., matching the type of race?
Well, when I say zones, I'm directly speaking about the energy level or energy systems that you're using. So, whether it's sugar, or we talk about glycogen, whether it's super anaerobic, whether it's aerobic, whether it's sustained, whatever power. Yes, like there's different energy systems that are at work, but those energy systems can be sort of defined by total time. So you'll see in your power profile, whether it's on Zwift or today's plan or wherever you're at, you'll see there's like 3 minute power, 8 minute or 6 minute power, 10 minute power, 15 minute. So a lot of those zones are shown in there more or less, but you really can't use those numbers as a definition of where your zones are currently. So you have to have someone that has a good understanding of where those zones are to help you with them. Because you might set those zones or those numbers that are in your today's plan or in your Zwift, in a race or in an effort, and you don't want to be wasting a lot of energy seeing how far you can, how much you can do in 20-minute all-out test, and then an hour all-out test, and then a 2-hour all-out test. But yes, that is a good place to kind of get an understanding of where those zones are.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're talking about then performing in events and how your training can make you better without focusing on FTP. How about Zwift racing? We're here in Zwift now. How is Zwift racing different than racing outdoors, or how is it similar?
Yeah, and so this would fall under our execution pillar, and the reason I came up with execution, and I'd never heard anything like this in any of my racing and my coaching, but working with you guys, it became very clear that there's a lot of skills and abilities that are missing that could be developed to help you guys out a lot, other than getting stronger. So it was like things that you could do: holding power, control with cadence, control with power, sitting and standing transitions, all this stuff, all these different components. They're skills that you guys could be training and creating and building that could help in group rides and in races, and specifically you're talking about Zwift racing. So the first thing is Zwift racing in general is obviously different than other racing. For those of you that have done road races, there's a lot. It's basically a lot of accelerating and decelerating, a lot of surging, a lot of explosive stuff. Whereas Zwift racing, I think, is very similar to climbing because of the drafting function and the equations that figure out the parts of how it works with you and other riders, and especially the importance on watts per kilo. I feel like it's very similar to climbing, and I had the privilege of working with Taya on one of the races. I kind of signed up on Discord or whatever, and I was like the director in your race, and watching the whole thing was.
And you're watching me, yeah.
It was essentially following you in the team car on a climb, because you were basically, there was no place to hide, even though you were in a draft or on a wheel. It was very similar to how it would be on a climb. Yes, there is some draft on a climb. You do have to be strategic with your efforts racing up a climb. So in my opinion, Zwift racing is almost exactly the same as being a climber racing, up Alpe d'Huez or something like that. The races are about 40 minutes long, 50 minutes long, which is the length of Alpe d'Huez. So for those of you that have done Zwift racing, it feels like you are battling it out on a Tour de France mountain, even though visually it doesn't look like you're on a climb all the time. What's happening with your body is the same. So you have to be very smart with your execution where you put your efforts in. And then we talked about the zones. You need to have a zone that you can sort of fall down to, right? That has good footing and has a good ledge. So if you're going to do an attack or you're going to go with an effort, well, guess what? You have to have a good floor to land on. And if you don't have that floor, you're going to blow up and you're going to slip. You're going to get dropped. And that's what happens to a lot of people you see in the Zwift racing. They don't even make it 20 minutes or 10 minutes because you guys start so hard. You guys go out of the gates fast. Those people that don't have a good floor, they're gone, right? They go out, they're either dropped in the beginning and you'll never see the peloton again. And that's something we can also talk about in Zwift racing I don't think you can really come back. So whatever the equations are or whatever, you kind of have to be in the race the whole time. So if there's attacks and there's breakaways going, you've got to go in all of them. I think it's very hard to cross a gap or come from behind in Zwift racing. So you have to, and which is very similar to racing up mountains and climbs. So you have to be really alert, but you have to be able to go above your threshold and then have a good footing to come back to. And then as we saw with Taya, once you get in the mix and you make that final effort or that final group, a lot of times it ends in a sprint. So if you don't have a sprint, then you need to have that ability to do these big surges to try and get rid of the other riders, and then have a high floor so you can accelerate, but then recover at a high power to clear the lactate and then accelerate again, exactly the same as Tour de France climb racing or mountain racing.
So, Tom, is that going to be discouraging for people who don't see themselves as climbers because perhaps they're focusing on watts per kilogram, or are there other skills and techniques that work with a racing Zwift that is similar to climbing, as you say?
Yeah, I think it's not discouraging for someone that's not a climber. In fact, it's encouraging because you can feel what it's like to be a climber, but you're not actually on a climb. So I don't think Zwift totally penalizes you so much for watts per kilo, but so even if you've got watts and I think you can come play for sure in the Zwift racing, but just be very careful with choosing the groups that you go in. I personally did a B race one time. And it was like whatever happened. I mean, it was like the next Tour de France peloton was in that B race. When I finished it, I thought, oh my gosh, like there's either some craziness happening on Zwift or the most genetically talented people are racing the Thursday night B race on Zwift. The Tour de France, all the World Tour needs to look here for these guys because the best riders are on Zwift. So don't be discouraged. People, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Do your best. But I would encourage people to race down a level because you can you're in more control. You can gauge your effort better. But back to the original question, definitely don't be discouraged if you're not a climber. In fact, be encouraged because it's a great way to work on your climbing in an atmosphere, in an area where it won't be so rough or extreme as being out on, the Col de Glibier or something like that in the middle of the summertime. You're right there in your house. You get to practice it with a bunch of people, your friends. And if you get dropped, it's no big deal. Just keep going.
Sure. So, Tom, perhaps we have about 10 minutes left here. Could we talk a little bit about nutrition? And I think that's another one of your pillars here. Mm-hmm. And some general guidelines on, for example, if I'm training early in the day, how do I prepare for that training session in terms of nutrition?
Yeah, great question. And I see this a lot with our athletes. A lot of them, they train early. They train at 5 a.m. before work, before the family gets up. And what happens when that it goes on is people just don't eat. They're not hungry this early. And maybe they've had a routine their whole life where they typically don't eat breakfast. And you see that a lot in Europe or whatever. People don't eat big breakfasts before work. And like when I first went to Italy, they don't even try in breakfast. And I couldn't believe that. It's like you chocolate croissant and a coffee and that's it. You're supposed to ride, 100 miles after that. In America, we're big into the pancakes and oatmeal, and we really celebrate the breakfast. So, but for whatever reason, most people don't, they don't prioritize breakfast. And I think that it's a very important meal. But especially with training, I think that you have to look at it, you have to use it. So the suggestion that I would say is, eat a good dinner the night before. If you're training early, your dinner the night before ultimately is going to be what your fuel is going to be for your workout. So, if you're going to do a hard workout at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., don't, go lean on the dinner. I know a lot of people are concerned about their weight. But if you're doing your intervals and like we talked about in the beginning, the talk, consistency is important. So if you're consistent with your training, you're training every single day or 3 times a week, and then, both days on the weekend, your metabolism is what's going to keep the weight off, not really like what time you eat. So, if you are training early, have a good dinner with carbs, obviously make it healthy, but, definitely that dinner is what's going to drive you. And then in the morning time, set something there that you'll eat that's really sort of simple sugar heavy, not a gel, but maybe a little bit of your favorite cereal that maybe has a little bit of sugar in it, or some fruit like a banana, or a small energy bar. I like the Cliff Kid bars, the Z bars. I think those are awesome. You could have one of those at the start.
I have tons of those around the house.
Yeah, those are awesome. And just eat one of those 10 minutes or 15 minutes before your workout. And what that is just putting a little bit of extra sugar in the system. So your brain is working a little bit better. Your body's going to feel a little bit better. And then more importantly, the last intervals of that hour workout or whatever you're doing in the morning are going to go a little bit easier. But again, that dinner the night before is critical, to having a good workout in the morning time. And again, consistently, you might be able to pull it off one day where you don't eat well before your workout, but it's going to catch you 2 or 3 days down the road.
I like that answer of the dinner the night before, because, and I'm one of those people who work out very early in the morning. I was afraid you're going to say, well, wake up an hour earlier and eat more and to be ready. So that's interesting. Okay. And the fact that the consistency in the training, we shouldn't be too concerned about eating the night before if we have a metabolism that's fired up through training, consistent training, that is.
Exactly.
And then how about the session itself? How about drinking water versus some electrolytes in it, or electrolytes in a mix of sugar? What would you recommend for, let's say, an hour and a half intensity workout?
Yeah, so one of the great things that I had during my career is I had access to a lot of the top sports scientists, and you hear a lot of different theories, you see a lot of different concepts in play. But at the World Tour level, what I did see is that there was less focus on drinking your electrolytes and more focus on eating your electrolytes. And as I transitioned to a coach, this started with doing cycling camps and working with a lot of you guys hands-on during the week. And we would always have these electrolyte drinks there because it seemed like that's what people wanted. But I would see more problems coming from these electrolyte drinks than I would see benefit. In fact, people's stomachs would get upset. They would get this false sense of being full. So they would reduce the amount that they would eat on the bike, and especially they would reduce the amount they would eat off the bike. Well, this would cause problems not necessarily that day on the bike, but the next day and the next day and the next day. So what we were talking about earlier was, that dinner the night before. A lot of that is keeping those systems fueled and topped off. So electrolyte drink, what I found a lot of times reduces that. It's sort of a deterrent to people eating properly and eating correctly and eating consistently. So my belief system, and that's from racing many years in the World Tour, where we're racing Tour de France and things like that, where day in and day out, eating a ton of food, we would use less electrolyte drinks because we needed our stomachs to be on point and ready to handle the hard work that we were doing on the bike, but then be able to eat during that hard work and eat after that hard work. So I hope you guys are listening to that. The electrolyte drinks a lot of times will fill you up and sort of cause this stomach distress, which will then reduce the likelihood of you eating a good meal right after your workout. And I'm sure you guys can all relate to this, where you're just not hungry after you train, which is absurd because that is the most important time for you to eat, because you're fueling for the next day's workout. So what I recommend is eating your electrolytes. So if you guys are doing these early morning trainer sessions, or you're on Zwift, we're sweating a lot. Even if you have fans, you're sweating. Make sure that you're eating the electrolytes, dinner, lunch, breakfast, snacks all the time, and good electrolytes like sea salt all the time. Just put it on your salad, put it in your pasta, put it on your sandwich, right? There's great places to get electrolytes, and ultimately you can eat the most and the most effectively electrolytes like that. It is too late to drink your electrolytes, right? Like, yeah, maybe if you're doing a 6-hour mountain stage, you're going to have to be taking some on board. But these hour and a half workouts, I'd say leave the electrolyte drink for another time. Have water on the bike. Make sure you're eating them in the salad the night before. You're eating salt throughout the day, and you're eating it afterwards. And I think if you do that, your stomach's going to feel a lot better. You're going to feel a lot lighter and leaner before and after your rides, retaining less water after your ride. I'm sure you guys have all been swollen after a hard workout. This is a great way to reduce that and feel a lot better. But again, it goes back to that stomach. Got to keep that stomach in check and making it and helping it feel good. And the best way to start doing that is leave that electrolyte drink for another time.
That's surprisingly simple, Tom. It's I haven't been doing that. I'm going to start doing that. So we're just talking about salt on your diet.
Yeah, I think it's overlooked. A lot of people are talking about sodium as negative, or right, but it's the right sodium and it's at the right time in the right places. So eating excessive amounts of sodium in processed food is not good, but sprinkling that sea salt on your salad with dinner is very good. So look for sodium in those areas, and it will make a big difference in your recovery and in your performance on the bike.
Excellent. So how about aminos, taking, essential amino acids or BCAAs in capsule or powder after a hard workout? Is that necessary?
Absolutely not.
Helpful?
And no, I think it's, and I've been on both sides of it, right? Like I'm American, and in the US, we believe that everything needs to be supplemented. When I was a kid, from the beginning, my mom was giving me vitamin C and coenzyme Q10 and all this stuff. So, I believed that from a young age that supplementation was really just part of life. And I used it throughout a lot of my cycling career. And towards the end of my career, I realized that, it's better to eat these things through your foods and pick healthy food, clean food, that is easy for your body to digest, and your body can build your muscles from these building blocks. So, and you start to learn, you start to see the research that your body can only absorb things a certain way and process things. It makes it harder. Your body loves real food. There's just no way around that. And you love real food. And as a pro athlete, and as an athlete in general, food is our reward. Let's be real, guys. Like that is our existence. That is one of the greatest parts of being an athlete is getting to eat. So let's not overthink this and take the eating out. Look for those amino acids in real food, fish, meat, all this stuff. If you're vegetarian, there's great vegan ways to get the protein naturally. Get it naturally. This stuff is not good, and I believe that your body should get what it needs, and I think real food is the answer for that.
I love it. I also have to tell you that my training just got cheaper.
Yeah, same here. Like you can, we love to do it. We love to go and buy all the protein powders and stuff like that, but try it. You'll be amazed by the results. It's you just feel so much better.
That's excellent. We had a lot of viewers here on Facebook and also other channels. Really appreciate, Tom, you coming out and sharing all that wisdom with us. I'll post a link to Cinch Cycling here in the comments if everybody wants more information or wants to get a hold of Tom. Tom, anything else that you want to say before we close it here?
No, I just had a great time. Thank you guys for cruising along. Sorry, I'm sitting in a chair and I'm not on my bike with you guys. I guess maybe as we do more of those, I'll feel more confident and comfortable to talk. I don't know how you do it, Taya, talk and ride. I can't talk and ride at all. But thank you guys. Had a great time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day and evening. See you next time. Thank you.